Join me today on Walk with History from the Titanic Men's Memorial in Washington, D.C. Hi, I'm Jen of Walk with History and the Talk with History podcast. I'm here in Washington, D.C. today, and we are visiting the Titanic Men's Memorial. So this memorial for the Titanic was explicitly put up for the men, and the money was raised by women. It's a interesting memorial. It's been here since 1968. This was not its original spot. Its original spot was where the Kennedy Center now stands, and they moved it here in 1968. No ceremony was given. They just moved it to this location. But it's here off the Potomac River, and you can see Fort McNair right across the way with the cherry blossoms. But we'll talk more about the Titanic Memorial. April 15th, 1912, the RMS Titanic sinks, taking with it 1,500 lives, most of them men, and this memorial was put up in their honor. It's one of the deadliest single ship sinkings ever to happen. But I think what made it so monumentous was its maiden voyage. It was the RMS Titanic's maiden voyage across the Atlantic. And here was a ship that was considered unsinkable, and it sinks on its maiden voyage, taking 1,500 souls with it. The Titanic hit the iceberg at 11:40 p.m. and it caused the plates to buckle inward, and then 5 of her 16 watertight compartments started to flood. And it had been designed to withstand flooding of 4, but when 5 flooded, it caused the whole ship to sink. At 2:20 a.m., so the iceberg hit the iceberg at 11:40 p.m., and then about 2 hours and 40 minutes later, it sunk. And it sunk at 2:40 a.m. It broke apart. 2 hours after the Titanic sank, the Carpathia rescued the survivors. 710 survivors they pulled out of the water that night. The disaster was met with worldwide shock. People were in dismay. They just couldn't believe it. This was a ship that was unsinkable. There were a lot of trials and major improvements to maritime safety and lifeboats. Just the SOS broadcast was put into play because that wasn't even a universal broadcast to make for help. So all of these things came into place after that. The wreck of the Titanic was discovered in 1985, and it's considered a living graveyard. When the Carpathia pulls into Pier 54 at New York, it pulls in on April 18th, so it sunk on April 15th. It pulls in on April 18th, and 40,000 people are there to greet it and meet those survivors. So this is Washington Channel Park, next to Fort Leslie McNair, which is right over there. But this monument was built by a woman. So because this was sponsored by the women of America, or the women of the Titanic, they put out a call to design this for a woman, and it was given to Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney of the Vanderbilt family, and she actually designed this in a competition. It's made by a single piece of red granite, and actually the gentleman who was the architect of this was the same architect of the Lincoln Memorial. This was unveiled May 26, 1931 by Mrs. Taft, by First Lady Taft. She was the widow of President Taft at the time. And it wasn't unveiled here. It's been moved here. It was unveiled where the Kennedy Center stands today, and they had removed it to build the Kennedy Center, and they put it back up here in 1968 to no ceremony. We're located at the foot of New Hampshire Avenue, and we're at Rock Creek Park. The inscription on the side says, "To the brave men who perished in the wreck of the Titanic, April 15th, 1912, they gave their lives that women and children might be saved." Erected by the women of America. And it's a male with his arms outstretched. What's interesting about this monument is this is the 44th year that the Men's Titanic Society will meet here at midnight on April 15th, and they will drink in honor of the men who perished on the Titanic. They will have a nice dinner. and remnants of the menu that was served that last night in the first class cabin to the men, and then they will come here at midnight and have a drink. They will wear tuxedos. It's about 20 men, and you have to kind of be asked to join, but it's like a society of men who come here to honor the men who gave their life that day. Don't forget to like and subscribe to Walk with History and our gift shop. We have cool t-shirts and stickers, Talk with History, our podcast. So make sure to check us out. So where does that idea of women and children first come from, right? You see it on the Titanic, it's evident on the Titanic. It actually comes from another ship called the Birkhead that was wrecked February 26, 1852, off of Cape Town, off of that point off of South Africa. And of the 643 people on board, 193 perished. And the soldiers, they gave rise to this unofficial Women and Children First protocol because they stood at ranks on deck while the women and children were loaded first into the lifeboats. And by the time all the lifeboats were gone, there were none left for them. And then it was immortalized by a poem by Kipling where he talked of the Birkhead drill.
Their work was done when it hadn't begun. They was younger nor me and you. Their choice it was plain between drowning in heaps and being mocked by the screw. So they stood and were still to the Birkenhead drill, soldier and sailor too.
So it's not a maritime law. It's not something that is actually really put into place, but it's just a chivalrous belief that women and children should go first. And it's mostly adopted from the fact of women and children need help. They need to be escorted onto the lifeboats, and they need that assistance before men can go. So it's mostly that idea. And then it grew into more like a chivalry idea that women and children, you know, are the most fragile and the most valuable, and men are gallant and can survive maybe a disaster. And so it's women and children first, and that's why this monument is to the men. This monument wasn't without controversy. Some people felt that it's strange to mention only men in the memorial when women were very brave as well. Women had to survive the night on the lifeboats. They had to paddle the lifeboats. They had to go on living. A lot of them would bear children and then go on living. So the women were also very brave. So they thought it wasn't very fair. Also, people thought the funds should go back to the families and the sailors who were the survivors and not to make a monument. So it did have controversy. People thought the Carpathia should also be memorialized, but in the end, it's just the men of the Titanic that's memorialized. Mrs. Taft dropped the veil, so it was covered with a veil, and Mrs. Taft dropped that veil on May 26, 1931. Don't forget there's a podcast, Talk with History. We go more in depth to these episodes and what it's like behind the scenes and how we come up with these ideas, and more research and information about these episodes. So catch us on anywhere you can get your podcast, Talk with History. It's good to remember people who have sacrificed. It's good to remember what people have done, bravery. For men to kiss their wives and children goodbye, putting them on their lifeboats, knowing that that was the last time they were going to see them alive. It must have been such a heart-wrenching moment. I can't imagine what those people went through in those final moments and final hours of the Titanic before it sunk. So to those men and women and children who were so brave that night in the face of the biggest peacetime disaster, let's just remember them as they walked into American history. Thank you. On to my next Walk with History.